continent, spanning from the Arctic up here, from Alaska across to Nunavut, Greenland, down through all of Canada, all of the United States, including an inset map of Hawaii over there, so there's all 50 states, down through Mexico, Central America, right to the border with Colombia, and also most of the Caribbean, plus the deepest oceans, everywhere, all around. So there are 600 cities and towns on it with their own cityscapes and landmarks. And this ranges from New York City right down to tiny hamlets north of the Arctic Circle. The content that you see on the map is of all varieties, right, from musical instruments right away to diamond mines and everything in between. Whatever showed up in my research of each place. And there are at least 1,000 animals roaming across the land, flying through the air, swimming in the oceans, which we will get to soon. It even goes out to the stars. They're all four corners, where the projection I chose slopes out to the curvature of the Earth. And using an electric eraser and a little star stencil I made, I actually put real constellations in these corners. To give, any opportunity for extra meaning. So in Alaska's corner, for example, that's Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and the North Star, which are very significant symbols of the North and on Alaska's flag. So always take that opportunity for extra meaning, because you could always improvise stars, but why not use the real thing? Now, I went with the title Portrait of a Continent to, I guess, keep it open if I do other continents. So perhaps it'll be part of a set. The next one would be Antarctica. Australia, the second option after that. Asia, Africa, Europe. I'm going to get a few more years for smaller projects, I think. This right here, this is the cartouche. That was the very last thing I drew. A cartouche is an emblematic design that often hosts a key and publishing details, all that kind of stuff on the map. But no key could unpack this map, so this is really more of its emblem. And this cartouche is designed to be literally a portrait of North America. It's a mini map there it's circled by the frame of the portrait. And the frame itself is this kind of phantasmagoria of iconic North America, with the features positioned relative to their location. I wanted something that would do justice to the immense detail of the map, although I think it probably got a bit out of hand. There are 50 animals on the cartouche alone, and so many other things. Famous buildings out here from Chicago, Quebec, New York, even the Mississippi, Missouri, flowing down beneath the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, down to the Cathedral in Jackson Square, New Orleans. A smaller screen than I thought, so I apologize if my crops are not quite big enough, but you can see things like Crater Lake and Yosemite and Grand Teton, Delicate Arch, Grand Canyon, Sequoias, even the Painted Ladies in San Francisco. And then, down to this part of the cartouche, you get into Mexico, past that little Texas corner with the Alamo, and then you've got things like the classic eagle and snake on the cactus from the Mexican coat of arms up there. There we go. And Mariachi and Jalisco, Agave. We've got pyramids from Teotihuacan, Chichen Itza, Tikal, some of those big volcanoes of central Mexico. And the Scarlet Macaw, which is very important. It's holding up a scroll with just my pure basics: how, when, and who. And I wanted an animal holding my details to basically say that without the content, I am nothing. It's the map works because the world is so interesting. So it's the bird that's carrying my information. Now, I wanted a map that would express just how magnificent, how full of mystery and adventure and intrigue our world is, and what a frontier life is. And I wanted to really bake those illustrations into it so that it was seamless, so it would flow and have unity and really smudge that line between cartography and art. Is it a map? Is it art? Whatever. So, I've gone forward a little bit here. So let me tell you how this piece came to be. I live down in Melbourne, which is, let's see what I'm doing. Melbourne over here. The other side of the Tasman Sea, but I've been in Australia for 6 years, but I am from here, top of the South Island, Nelson, New Zealand. And for as long as I can remember, I love maps. And I think it's New Zealand is a great place to be from for a budding geographer because it's not too big, but its landscapes are dramatic, diverse. And a few times as a kid, I had a window seat on the flight between Nelson and Wellington, which in only 25 minutes, you fly over mountains, islands, ocean, snow-capped volcanoes to the north. Beneath you, a labyrinth of forested waterways called Marlborough Sounds. And as a little kid, this changed everything for me. I mean, the places in which my life was set were suddenly revealed from above as part of this grand theatre of geography. I used to pore over atlases when I was little. I'd stay up at night drawing little maps of New Zealand and Australia and the world. And there was just something about maps, the breadth of them, the adventure that was suggested in every page of an atlas. And this one in particular, I was obsessed with. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. It's published in '92. It's the Dawling Kindersley Animal Atlas. And Kenneth Lilly's illustrations are just gorgeous. And by giving them a geographic setting through that atlas format, it felt like I was really taking a trip around the world when I opened this up. In fact, this book inspired me to make this map here when I was 16, which really planted the seeds for so much that came later. This one doesn't really have a name, but I pulled it out of storage in Wellington recently. I'm glad to see it's back in the mix. So I'm actually working on making a colour version of this at the moment. I didn't draw another major map for years after this one. I went out and did other things with my life, and it stood alone. But I never forgot how much I loved drawing it. And then everything changed. So in 2011, when I was 21, I decided to leave New Zealand and see what was happening in the rest of the world. And I had a good friend who was living it up in California. So nothing to lose, I just flew over there with a one-way ticket. And the grand scale of the continent shocked me immediately. I'd never left New Zealand. I preferred reading the American landscape as it went along. Every bump, rise, and stretch in it mystified my longing. It's from Carolyn. And that feeling of a mystified longing, I certainly can relate to. Like many, my first view of North America was landing in LA. That's right, I just had a connected flight up to Northern California. But beneath these towering mountains when you're landing, I saw this thick layer of smog, which I heard was much worse in the 70s, but I've still never seen anything like it. And I knew that in this one city, more than 4 times the population of my country were living out their lives. You can talk about a grand theatre of geography. And California, massive as it is just one of 50 states. Many of these larger than New Zealand by every measure. So you cross this vast country and you're in New York City. North of the United States is Canada, a country with the same land area as the US, but a population less than the state I just arrived in. The whole scale of everything felt infinite to me. I remember pressing my nose against the window of the planes, looking across this frontier. So in the first few weeks, I kept asking people, how much have you seen of this crazy place? What's it like to call somewhere this big home? And frankly, I still ask that question. The US is a big country. It's very overwhelming at times. So I had no idea if I'd stay longer than that summer, but I ended up staying for 2 years. Going between the States and Canada, just putting together a living, however, from cooking to turfing lawns in the Vancouver rain. That sucked. That was really bad. But I went on all these adventures, and it just made me fall in love with the place and its epic geography. And towards the end of those 2 years, I was living up in the city of Montreal. It was late 2012. The winter was starting to set in. I was headed back to New Zealand shortly. My time was almost up. But I couldn't stop thinking about this thundering land that I'd gotten lost in. I'd close my eyes at night and just picture North America within all of its geographic glory. And maps at the same time had returned to my life in a big way, ever since I landed in LA. I was collecting them, drawing them, practicing sketching the US freehand to impress people. I guess I wouldn't call it a party trick, but had its moments. And my housemate in Montreal, Douglas, he asked me to draw him a map before I left the city, a memento for the apartment. Now, Now, we had this big old refrigerator. We'd found it on the side of the road, and he'd painted it white to cover these nasty stains it had. Yeah, it was just terrible. The fridge was not in good shape. But with that fresh paint, it kind of struck me as a canvas. So, I did this. This is called North America on Fridge.
How long did it take you to do it?
This took me a month, but in my free time, and it was a very problematic canvas. I actually don't recommend it, especially one that's in use. With food, cooking happening around it every single day, and the ink on it would run with every splash because the sink is right to the right of it. So if you're doing the dishes, that's right. That's it. And by the way, I checked in with Douglas. It's still in use 7 years later. Look, this was so much fun. I was feeling things I hadn't felt since that old animal map I showed you. But what I did not realize at the time was that this fridge was just the draft for something much bigger. But I left Montreal, moved over to Australia, and Perth was the first place I lived for about a year. And as soon as I had a place there, I started a new map. No more household appliances. I went with paper and colored pencil. And this was the result. It is called South Asia and Australasia. It spans from Pakistan all the way to New Zealand. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into with this. And suddenly I was throwing all my free time into this giant map. And I'd chosen a projection that meant I had to start by drawing India and China. Right out of the gate, with the only experience really that fridge. So, that was hard. I would just get home from work. For 6 months this took me. I'd get home from work and greet the giant map that was looming in my bedroom. Start working. But I loved it. And I can imagine this is a feeling that we all know very well. A deep relish for this kind of work. This kind of creative exploration of the world. And once this map got underway, I was establishing a very sacred working space in my life. It has been a true friend ever since. A place to pour in everything. Fear, hope, curiosity, whatever is in you, just a place to put it. So once it was finished, I was getting the hang of colour pencils, and I left Perth, I moved to Melbourne, and decided to start North America, not on a fridge, for real this time. So it started in May 2014. This is a little time lapse just to put you in the studio. It's big, 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide, so it's 1.5 meters by 1.2 meters, and that is a magnifying lamp, right? So I draw almost everything in magnification. Don't ask me what the specific magnification is, it doesn't say on the lamp, I need to figure that out, but the detail is really tiny. And I use colour pencil for almost everything, but fine liner pens for labels, rivers and borders, and a few other things. And I projected this map here, which is of the continent, onto the paper, which is just the Google Earth perspective. And I traced in the coastlines and the borders with pencil by shining that to the paper. And this gave me the skeleton I need. Now, I'm right-handed, so I usually work from west to east. And I began with Vancouver, slowly made my way across the continent and up the continent. And I don't even like looking at that, actually. But in every corner of North America, I researched for things that might evoke a feeling of place. Content that would be familiar to a local. Now, sometimes decisions are obvious, right? Of course New York will have the Statue of Liberty. Western Montana will have a grizzly bear. Dice in Vegas, a trumpet in New Orleans, reggae in Jamaica. But at other times, I could spend hours just looking for clues. Central northern Quebec, and I'm downloading French PDF maps from fishing outfitters' websites, just trying to find something specific, And as every place is different, the experience of researching and drawing it is different too. Working on Houston is nothing like working on Greenland. As the map progressed, I was challenged with a continental range of diversity. Months turned to years, and I was dealing with everything from skyscrapers to tornadoes, from bison to jellyfish. For 1 month I'd be immersed in Honduras, and the next would be all about the Yukon. So, this here gives you the sense of the natural size there. the outset, I may not have started. I'm glad I didn't know, because this is my life now, but I remember telling people that I would have proofs released in Christmas 2014. The last time I checked is ages ago. As the years went by, my shock at the size of this task turned into a kind of grizzled determination. One day, I would finish this and be released from its spell. And things got especially tough in 2017. I'd been drawing it for 3 years, which was already 6 times longer than the previous map I'd done of Australia. And I finally completed all the land, 2017. Should have been ready to start the ocean and make my way to the end. But the thousands of hours of practice that I had acquired over those years drawing this was showing up in the artwork. So a huge qualitative gulf had opened between the old and the new concept. Plus, there had been some fading. So I opted to go back and fix the early stuff. At first, I described this very optimistically as touch-ups. And I used a lot of pen early on. I don't use much pen anymore because obvious reasons, but I figured I could only fix so much due to all that pen. But then I got my X-Acto knife, started scratching the pen off the paper, and it turned out I was able to redo anything, including about 100 old cities that were all drawn in pen. So process looks something like this. I can watch this. Basically what you'd expect. It takes ages. I mean, you can spend 3-4 hours just scratching off one city.
This is how monks would correct their manuscripts in the medieval era.
Really? Oh, wow.
They would scrape that film.
Well, it's great to know you can do it if you make small mistakes in pen, but at this kind of scale, it's just the electric eraser there. The term touch-ups became a joke. Well, it's 290 GSM. I'm not sure the US paperweight, how you describe that, but it's thick, relatively thick art paper. The specs of it, I don't have off the top of my head right now. Yeah. But it's heavy enough that I wasn't scratching through, thankfully. But I was set back by a year and a half because of this touch-up process. I was scratching off, redrawing, researching half of the USA and a third of Canada, roughly, or so. Actually, more than what that shows, even, because I had to sort of blend it into what had now become the oldest content on the East Coast. But it was this kind of, I had to smooth it in and try to make it look consistent. It's like the worst case of double handling you've ever seen. And having years of intricate work laid out on one huge piece of paper, it comes with a lot of concerns because mistakes can happen, and an accident that damaged or destroyed the original would be a catastrophe. It gave me nightmares. Spilling the coffee. No. So concerns include, but are not limited to, what vessels are safest in the studio, how to limit fading over time, how to evacuate it in fire, how to get an insect off it without squashing the bug into the paper. So I know from experience. How to transport it before scanning in photography, because this map has never been rolled to this day. It's just too big, and actually if I'd chosen some slightly thicker paper stock, I might have been able to do it, but I was too scared of hanking it. Other concerns here, what if a bird got in the house and died of it? What if an open door, a gust of wind would rip it from the board? If I left the window open, would Keith, the neighbour's cat, sneak into the house? And could I trust them around the mat? Because I can't trust them around the herb garden. So, Luckily, it's in a pretty safe spot. I work in a very secure apartment in Melbourne, and I'm right above the train tracks. And it's passing trains have been part of the rhythm of drawing ever since. Now, it's important to mention, in case you're wondering why this all took so long, until a year and a half ago, I did have a day job. So I was doing this at night, on weekends and holidays. It's a lot of time alone, man. I'd work deep into the night quite often, taking breaks by stepping outside to the balcony and looking back in at the map. Roughly looks like that. And the dark skies were relief from all that detail. And looking in, lit by lamps, the map kind of glowed like an open sign in the night. Trains had stopped for the day, the country was asleep, be an owl on the train tracks, the wires above the train tracks, rather. Sometimes I'll see a fox running down the empty street. I do love working at night sometimes. I mean, darkness is beautifully created when it feels like the world is asleep and it's only you. It's like being a kid again, with the blanket over your head reading about dinosaurs. So thankfully, my apartment has been a safe place to draw it. To put it in Australian terms, in 5 years in that apartment, I've only seen one huntsman spider in the house. So that's pretty good. Never seen a ceiling leak, and I don't think Keith, the cat, wants to come in. So it's a deer, but despite concerns I might never finish it, on the last day of February, at about 10 p.m, I signed it off and slumped back into my chair, just dumbfounded. Felt like the full weight of those 4.5 years were right there. Because this was a dear friend I could always rely on, and I felt some sadness in that final moment, saying goodbye to the process. It's a project that has been bedrock in my life for so long. But the project isn't complete because now I'm getting press release to the world. That's when I actually can truly sign it off, and that's happening very soon. Anyway, given that it has so much content, it's often hard to know what to cover in a talk, but one thing I like to do is take you on a little float down the river. I think doing that, you can get a sense of what's in there, excuse me. So I've chosen the Missouri because it's great, and I'll just take you down to where it meets the Mississippi at St. Louis. And this might be a little awkward. I'm just going to have to go like this for a second. Yeah. So the Missouri officially starts right... Oh, wow, this is going to be awkward. I think we can do this. So it starts where the Gallatin and the Madison and the Jefferson River meet. And, it flows Yellowstone is down here where many of the rivers kind of feed from. And you've got things like Grand Prismatic Spring and Old Faithful, Yellowstone Falls, Grizzlies, Wolves, Bison. It goes past one of the largest T-Rex skulls ever found in the Museum of the Rocky at Bozeman. And then it flows past Helena, the state capital. So capitals, you'll notice, have the flags. That's how I mark them off. And then it goes into the Marias River, flows down into Missouri here, draining East Glacier National Park, the crown of the continent, as they call it. So I put a little crown right here on Triple Divide Peak, because I figured what better way to what better place to put a crown than a mountain that flows to 3 oceans, the only one in the world. So it depends how you define Hudson Bay, but it's certainly Arctic in its feeling. It flows west to the Pacific through the Columbia, East Marias, Missouri, Gulf of Mexico, and then north to the St. Mary Lake. Only case in the entire world where this is happening. So that's the crown. Now it flows past the Blackfeet Nation here, and out through the Missouri River breaks, down into the Fort Peck Lake in eastern Montana now, where prairie dogs and antelope roam. And the Fort Peck Reservation here. Now, there is a lot of Indigenous content on the map, and it's chosen like the rest of the content on the map, with a lot of research and deliberation, but without a specific set of rules. So it's not comprehensive, it won't be perfect, but I read all I can about the Indigenous history and the culture of a region, and with a particular nation or tribe, I'll be searching many places, including the websites of the reservations, to see if I can represent with any precision at all. Often I'll pull symbols from flags and seals, and so with a headdress or a teepee that you see, I'm trying to ensure it's a style relevant with the area. The map's so big I can't zoom in too much. But, so this is an Assiniboine headdress from the Fort Peck tribes, and that is a bison shield from the Fort Belknap Reservation. So flying into North Dakota now through oil and gas country, just over the border, that's Saskatchewan's coal fields, and that thermometer is the site of the hottest ever temperature recorded in Canada. And down through Minot, North Dakota, that's a little Scandinavian Dala horse, which you can find there. And these are the Turtle Mountains, a very mysterious place. On the Canadian side, it's an eastern painted turtle, and that is a turtle design from the seal of the Turtle Mountain Reservation. Onwards, the river is joined by the Little Missouri now, flowing through the Badlands of Teddy Roosevelt National Park, and that's Teddy Roosevelt's glasses. Next to the cabin he built, I believe, the Maltese Cross. Then the Missouri continues down through Bismarck, past the North Dakota Capitol building, and around here there are vast fields of sunflowers, as well as honey, the state leading the nation in the production of both. Then into South Dakota now, through a set of major Sioux reservations, Cheyenne River, Standing Rock, and then the Black Hills drain into the Missouri. So we'll just go over there for a second because it's such an interesting little location. You've got, obviously, the world-famous Mount Rushmore, but also the Crazy Horse Memorial, which is a statue of the Lakota leader that has been underway since 1948. And if it was ever completed, it would be the largest sculpture on Earth, at least currently. And speaking of the world's largest, this is the world's largest coal mine, the Black Thunder Mine in eastern Wyoming. And absolutely massive. What have we got? Devil's Tower, this is Deadwood, Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, Mammoth Hot Springs, Wind Cave. I forgot what it's called, Badlands National Park, of course, with an elusive black-footed ferret. Very easy choice for that area. You'll see a saber-toothed tiger skull. You can find a lot of saber-toothed tiger fossils around in Badlands. And the Dakotas were actually a lot of fun. Back to the Missouri now, as it really gets into the Midwest. Fields of wheat of the Great Plains are giving way to corn, which is sort of ushered in, I think, by South Dakota's Corn Palace. It's a pheasant there, the state bird. Sioux City, Omaha, that's the Geodome from the world-famous zoo. And that is the Kool-Aid Man. And Hastings, Nebraska is famous for being the home of Kool-Aid. It's not always easy to find content in Nebraska. So the river continues onwards past soybeans. These are the lowest hills to Kansas City now, really in the Midwest. And then the Missouri cuts across the state of Missouri, and here you kind of catch the northern Ozark region. So natural bridges, the sound of the fiddle coming out from the hills, a wine region. That's a lead mine. Bat, Ozark Longy and Bat coming out of here. There's a heron over there. And then finally, the Missouri meets the St. Louis. It meets the Mississippi, St. Louis. So we can get out of this awkward position now. Sorry, I'm not taking you all the way to New Orleans, but I'm working on that tour as well. Oops, excuse me. Let's go back. Okay. So, I'd love to keep floating down the river, but in the interest of getting to some other areas, let's move on. Now, I'm going to take us to Texas and to the very earliest days of the map. Now, outside of Instagram, the first time I put anything online about this map was on the subreddit map forum. And at the time, I'd been drawing this for only maybe 6 months. And I took this very rough photo with my phone, and slapped it with a crazy amount of watermarks. You can see them. And I just put it on Reddit without much thought to see if it would get some feedback. And to my surprise, it got quite a response. There was lots of upvotes, hundreds of great comments, and there was a lot of this was very valuable feedback I was getting for the first time from often locals. There's enthusiasm for the style, so I was very encouraged. But there were a few quite specific negative responses, which really got me thinking. And one feature of this image caused a lot of controversy. Anybody want to hazard a guess what that might be? It's in Texas, so... Okay. It is the omission of Fort Worth. You got Dallas? Not Dallas, Fort Worth. Oh, yeah. These are some of the comments that I got. You can actually see my own downvotes on some of them. So look, I explained my rationale is that skylines take up so much space, so cities that share an urban region, I round them up into the biggest city, and in this case it's Dallas. But my metrics didn't matter against the reality on the ground. The reality that it's Dallas-Fort Worth, Twin City. Now I did have some defenders, don't get me wrong, but reading the comments, looking into it, I actually agreed with the haters. Well, maybe not this guy, but certainly everyone else, because not every city is the same. And my attempt at a strict selection formula came up against real life. There are places that are twin cities, and the US has quite a few examples of these. Two of the best known are Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Dallas, Fort Worth. And Minneapolis was split because St. Paul's a state capital, so I had to. And they found the picture of Minneapolis on my website. And it was all over. But the more I looked into it, the more I felt skipping Fort Worth was a mistake. And this was very frustrating because I'd drawn Dallas in bold black pen. It was locked in. My big fear about throwing so many hours into one piece of paper had come true. I made a mistake. So I proceeded with the map and just resigned myself to, I guess, forever meeting the wrath of Texans. Years later, as you now all know, I found out that you can remove pen with a knife. So lucky me. Fort Worth made it in the end. But after this, I paid more attention and kind of loosened up the rules a bit. And there are other twin cities that you could argue, it's only Tampa, I don't have Tampa St. Pete, I'm sorry, Florida. Yeah, there's some other examples, it's really hard. You can have your selection formula, but you have to be flexible if there is that situation. I think no one would fault me for New York City not having Newark. But, So, later on after this, I was drawing the Caribbean, and I had to think carefully about reality on the ground. For this illustration, Haiti had experienced such geographic trauma in the earthquake of 2010 that most landmarks I would use to construct a cityscape were gone. Okay, there's a bit of a needle to thread here, because trauma is not evenly spread around the world. Some places suffer earthquakes and others don't. Some burn, some freeze. And the story of humanity, too, has a profound imbalance of patterns. Prosperity, poverty, peace, war, and these are ever-present dynamics in human geography. And this is a challenge in illustration because if choosing to display trauma somewhere, while elsewhere beauty is flourishing, what is your goal? Pure idealism, I think, is appealing, not only because we want art to be beautiful, but because our work matters and how the world is perceived. But when you're feeling, when you're telling a non-fiction story, you've got to be careful. However, beauty isn't a matter of good and bad, and rather than decorate the world, I would like to engage with it. So throughout my work, I've drawn factories and open-pit mines and oil refineries, tornadoes, volcanoes, earthquakes, burning rainforest, because they are all part of the story of the place. Surely these shape its experiential qualities as much as anything. But perhaps pure idealism is the best way forward. I don't know. It's an interesting question. But there are places that have been transformed by recent trauma in which you have to ask this question. And Port-au-Prince, Haiti, is one of those places. So I took an approach that I used from my South Asia, Australasia map when I drew Christchurch, New Zealand. The symbol of the city, the cathedral, was toppled in the big quake in 2011. So I drew the cathedral over here very lightly with an aura to make it kind of ghostly, but I kept it prominent. A crane is rising up for the rebuild, while the cathedral is there to respect both the trauma and the unbroken spirit of the city. So in Port-au-Prince, I did something similar. There are two iconic buildings that are no longer there. Its cathedral and the presidential palace, both which have the ghost effect, and both are there for the trauma of the event and the unbroken spirit of the city that lives on. Now, one day both of these places will have new landmarks, but a map like this is a timestamp, right? I mean, things always change. Borders change, skylines grow, skylines crumble. All up, my mantra has been to treat places and topics with an avid curiosity. When communicating the real world through art, there must be respect for the content. And in my case, I'm making art out of people's homes. I mean, these are not just abstract ideas pouring freely from the soul of an artist. No, I mean, people care a great deal about where they're from, where their friends and family are from. It's very precious cargo to be handling. And with this map, it gets pretty personal, because I might be drawing your church, your statue, bridge, park, mountain. I mean, these are things that make you think of home instantly, material that is part of who you are.
So yeah, I do worry about being disconnected from your topic of focus. Drawing North America from Australia, this was a constant concern, because there is a difference between drawing a place you've never been, using photos from the internet, and drawing something you've experienced. There's a difference between a photo of a koala and an actual koala, right? And that's a big difference, and you don't want that kind of difference to manifest itself in your creativity. But travel and field research, it may not be relevant, certainly might not be feasible. So what can we do, as home, so what can we do in our day-to-day life to make contact with what we're working on? I mean, can we stand that spark of inspiration just a little further to see what happens? So over the years, I've worked on something that I call method mapping, which I mean, it could be method drawing. It's basically to try and work like a method actor. You know, if you're going to play a boxer in a movie, you go and get some sparring lessons. So with my mapping, I like to match music and podcasts, movies, books, food, activities, whatever's available, to match it with the topic at hand. It's kind of like a remote immersion, I guess. Now, it started when I was drawing the Arctic, which is a massive, vast portion of the map, and I was just overwhelmed trying to make sense of tundra from Melbourne. I mean, frankly, it seemed like another planet. I couldn't imagine it. Islands the size of Great Britain with 146 inhabitants. Oceans of ice, a sun that either never sets or never rises. I mean, who was I to be drawing the Arctic? While in Australia, having never been anywhere like this. But one experience that I had had in my life previously did come back while I was drawing it. A film that I watched years ago called Untitled Chapter, The Fast Runner. It's shot in Nunavut, Canada, a world away from anywhere most people have ever been. And it retells centuries-old mythology. 90% of the cast and crew are Inuit. So I rewatched it and was struck by what a vivid sense of place it has. The dog sled and the crunch of snow were constant, while Inuit music, in particular throat singing, made for a very haunting, powerful soundtrack. So watching Atanajuet gave me something to relate to, a window into the place I was trying to draw. So after watching it, I resumed the Arctic quite a lot more inspired, almost hearing the snow underfoot. And sound is the most powerful sense, right? It's a major part of experiencing a place, which brings me to music. Now, I started the Caribbean not long after Atanajuet, and the first stop was Cuba. And I decided to kick this off by watching another movie I saw years ago, Buena Vista Social Club. And I remembered it for that same reason, this vivid sense of place, but there's something else too. I remembered it having spectacular music. So I watched it, loved it, and I felt carried away to Cuba, enchanted by the country. And above all, the music, it drew me in. I was blown away. The sheer skill of everyone in that film is impressive enough, but the style is just so rich and soulful that I fell in love. So, as I drew in Cuba, I listened non-stop to Cuban music, all varieties. Not just in the studio, but in my car, all the time, everywhere I went. Still some of my favourite music today. And I then went exploring Melbourne's limited Cuban cuisine, but I found myself chatting to Cubans and getting ideas for my map. I even bought a Monte Cristo to smoke on the last day of the Cuban work. So I was obviously having too much fun. But at least in my heart, I felt engaged with the topic. No substitute for being there, but I was doing what I could from 9,000 miles away. And one of my favorite things about being a visual artist is that as you work, you can listen to whatever you want. And we are so lucky for this aspect. Musicians can't do that when they're working on music. Writers are pretty limited. With that, you're not also a podcast while you write, But the artist has a free soundscape, whether for music or spoken word in this age of podcasts and audiobooks. All of it accessible right here. We are very blessed for this open sound environment in our work. So, in the spirit of method mapping, I recommend taking a break from your favorite music, podcasts, radio. Try something new. And can you find audio that matches the topic at hand? Now, you might fall in love with what you find. So, on the very final part of this talk now, I'm going to get into everyone's favorite topic, animals. And here are just some of what you'll find on the map. So it's probably a little small for some of you, but so what have we got here? It's a ring-tailed cat, Gila monster, Kermode spirit bear, ptarmigan, sea turtles of all varieties. We've got possum, guadabaranco. We've got leatherback turtle. This is an ocelot. As you can see, it's all over the place. Frigate bird. Many, many different species. And while there are plenty of repeated species on the map, there must be at least 20 polar bears up in the Arctic, I never, ever let them repeat a pose. Ever. Right? Not even for something like an ear of corn, I will draw it a little bit differently every time, because you don't want that clone effect. And like differences make details seem even more boundless and organic. So every bear will strike a different pose, and thus every bear tells a different story. And not only are animals a key to getting people to engage with the map, regardless of their interest in geography, but there are few things that more vividly evoke a sense of place than animals. And here in Australia, we know that well. No matter what your geographic knowledge is, a platypus, a kangaroo just screams Australia to anyone, just as a bison and a bald eagle would North America. And animals are so often used in national and regional symbology, even ones that we drove to extinction. I mean, you'll see the thylacines on Tasmania's license plate. So animals are critical in my map and help me make geography more compelling to a particularly important demographic, kids. Now, all that said, animal selection is not without its controversy. While I do take advantage of their cultural symbolism, for example, the scissor-tailed flycatcher in Oklahoma is a state bird, or the razorback pig in Arkansas, that's a college football reference, or college athletics in general. Generally, I prefer to just let animals roam within their range without our anthropocentric feelings making all the calls. Talk I gave in Chicago last year, I had someone from Kansas get kind of annoyed at me because of... I didn't really, skunks don't always have the most positive connotations. I don't think that my let animals roam argument was suffice. But on the flip side, completely on the opposite of that, I've drawn wild animals that people found meaningful in very surprising ways. So this raccoon down here in Arkansas, that's just a wild animal, not there for any particular reason. But I got this email from a guy in a little town called Gillette, Arkansas. And he said he was a massive fan, couldn't wait for print. And when he saw that I'd chosen to represent Gillette's annual raccoon supper, he said he was sold. I didn't confirm or deny, I just said that. Yeah. Turns out there's many different ways you can eat raccoon. That's what they're up to over in Gillette. So, while on land, these animals are competing with a myriad of other continents in the vast oceans of the map. It's a very different situation. Here's just a little tiny handful of the sea creatures that you'll find swimming around. The ocean itself is one of my favorite things to draw. It's made up of bathymetry, which is just ocean underwater topography. So all of these creatures are swimming amongst seamounts and trenches and abyssal plain, continental shelves. And as I know coming from New Zealand, where there is a coastline, the story of the place is in the sea as much as it is on land. I mean, oceanic content, whether it's fish, whales, seals, turtles, coral, boats, shells, they are always part of a coastal story. And while the land did pull up many surprising animals I've never heard of, ring-tailed cats and coatabundis and tamanduas, in the ocean, you got a lot weirder. Creatures of the deep. There's some crazy stuff out there. A source of amazement, always. Like this big fin squid, which was filmed off a deep oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico. Or the wonderfully named small-spined squidfish. Or this Greenland shark, which can live for centuries. I mean, I can't think of anything more different to my life than to be 300 years old living at the bottom of the ocean. Who needs fantasy, right? So, whether on land or sea, animals are playing a very important role. Which brings me to a final little story I'd like to leave you with today. And I'll open up for questions after that, so if you have any, you're most welcome to ask. But we're going to go off to Costa Rica to meet the clay-coloured thrush, or iguero, the country's national bird. And when researching Costa Rica, I found it very strange that a boring old thrush would be the national bird of one of Earth's most biodiverse countries. And the rest of Central America has choices that you'd more expect. Panama has a harpy eagle, Honduras, scarlet macaw, Belize, toucan up here, the quetzal in Guatemala is even its currency, let alone the national bird. But for whatever the idea of the national bird is actually worth, they do definitely play important roles in national identity over time. I mean, just think of the American bald eagle, or in my case, coming from New Zealand, I've identified as a Kiwi my whole life. So, Costa Rica, where 2 continents and 2 oceans meet, is famous for its biodiversity. So I was puzzled that a thrush would be its standard bearer. I mean, I wasn't even sure I'd draw it quite frankly, because Costa Rica is very small on my map. And why would I allocate valuable real estate to a thrush? All the creatures I could put there instead. So I dismissed it. Until I was in the last little bit left, that's the thrush there. I was in this last little corner, working through it, and I decided to just read more. I didn't want to break this national bird precedent. And it turns out, this little thrush was chosen for its familiarity, its friendliness, and its very alluring song. They tend to live close to people, and they're common sights in cities and towns. The male song goes into hyperdrive in mating season, which coincides with the start of the rains. They've long been featured in the literature and music of the country. And suddenly the iguero was looking a lot more interesting. And it kind of dawned on me that I'd missed its importance by focusing just on appearances. This charming bird was so well chosen as a national icon because it resonates with people's actual lives. A lot more than rarer birds. I mean, most Kiwis have not seen a Kiwi in the wild. They're very rare. Scarlet macaws are almost gone from Honduras from what I read last. But in Costa Rica, you can predict the range of this bird's song. It's a humming choice for a national bird, but it's one grounded to a common experience of life in a place. It's like that question, when we illustrate the world, as we do, how do we get closer to the ground and closer to the real thing? Now, it may come from getting out of the house and into the world. It may come from listening to music from the place that you're working on. And perhaps it's the kind of thinking that gets a thrush named the national bird of a mega-diverse tropical country. So once I read about this friendly bird, I found its song on YouTube, and I closed my eyes. And I imagined not the cloud forests of Costa Rica's volcanoes, but an urban park in the capital, or a farmhouse awaiting the rains. First I dismissed it, now I saw a perfect choice, and I've since been a little more curious in the seemingly ordinary. Because if you filter only for shiny objects, is that, decoration at a certain point? So it was. When Costa Rica had a thrush join a strawberry poison dart frog, blue morpho butterfly, Hercules beetle, a 3-toed sloth, and a hatchling sea turtle, along with the other thousands or so animals roaming on the map. And it is amazing to be joining all of you here this week as well. Thank you. Yes.
So you, maybe besides yourself, you had a target audience in mind when you were doing this. Maybe you didn't. But I'm curious as to whether, as you put your progress out there and got comments, whether you were surprised at what kind of people seem to be attracted to, fascinated by, and commenting on your work that might have been somewhat different than who you might have had in mind originally.
Yeah, well, firstly, in terms of target audience, it was none. I mean, it was just started as a passion project. I had no idea this would even be a career, quite frankly. So I had to play catch-up later in some of those decisions that I made, such as, drawing oil refineries in oil countries. I had to pull back because I realized this is the real thing. But as for a particular type of person, a particular demographic that is interested in this work, frankly, I have not managed to figure that out quite yet. it seems to be most closely related to the place itself. So if somebody's interested in this map, there was a higher chance they're going to like it if they're from the United States. So it's a very broad way to put it, but people, 5-year-olds all the way to 85-year-olds have shown a lot of enthusiasm for this. So, I mean, I can look at my Google Analytics from my website and see what type of people, but in general, it tends to be associated with the place. And when I have a print of the map displayed, what usually happens is that people go straight into where they live. And then if they don't live in North America, they will tell you about the trip they took there. I went to Vegas, I went to Dallas, and etc. So I think the interest seems to come directly related to the place itself. Yeah. Yes?
Have you been back to the U.S. since the first trip? And if not, where's the first place you're going to go?
Oh, well, I have been back. Yeah, I go back. The last 3 years, I've been going back once a year to go and give talks and really just work on my career and everything like that. So yeah, I'm there quite a lot now. Although, if I hadn't been, the first place I'd want to go would probably be. Fort Wayne, Indiana. No, I think it would be southern Utah. Absolutely, because I've been skirted through Monument Valley, but then we headed out. Utah, especially that southern half of the state, and the east of it, is. I could not believe the pictures that I was looking at, that they were in the real world. I mean, Canyonland, the Needles, those kind of places, absolutely out of this world landscapes. So Utah as well as Arizona, and also I'd like to check out Nevada properly, because this basin and range, you don't even think of Nevada as being full of all these different mountain ranges that have their own ecologies that are quite unique. And then I want to see it as well, obviously New York City is New York. But in terms of where I go now, I usually am in DC, New York, Bay Area, where all the big stuff is happening. Yeah, but I think if I could just do whatever I want and go over there and have a trip, I'd be in Alaska, I'd be in Baffin Island, even Canada.
I thought that you said that somebody was sponsoring this map, or this was a commission when I talked to you last night.
Oh, really? Oh, no.
No, it's not. It's just you're doing it for yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. So for the first 3 years of the project, even first 3.5, totally doing this in my spare time with an unrelated day job, which I've now quit and gone full time and make my living and giving talks and various things like that, and some contract work I'm doing as well. But no, this was not sponsored by anybody, which is great because I didn't have to answer to anybody in the process, and now I can do whatever I want with the release. Yeah. Yes.
You thought about doing a black and white version and selling it to schools as a school project for them to color, or like geography?
No. That is a cool idea. Because it's easy enough to just make it black and white. I mean,
even leave blank spaces for them to fill in and do their own research, so you don't need to do all of it, and that allows them to use their own skills as well as foreign skills, and then research what is and have that little bit about listening to things, and the video of things, and watching movies, so that they are exploring things that they might otherwise never travel to.
I mean, that's a wonderful idea. And when I go in, I do some class units with kids in Melbourne at different schools, and often, I'll give a talk and take them through more aimed at children talk, and then they will usually print out a big map of Australia, and they give it to groups, and they try to research content and then draw it. Now, that does bias for kids who are actually good at drawing, so there's a little bit of a problem there, because just some people are geographers, but they're not necessarily going to be artists, so there's a bit to work out there, but that kind of approach is really cool. And actually, that first world map of animals I showed you, that's just screaming to be coloured in. So, like I said, I'm working on something around that idea as well. But and that also just brings me slightly to, I'm releasing prints of the full map this year, but people really want crops. They want the lower 48, they want even their state, their region, and I'm not going to do that quite yet, because just releasing this is hard enough. But also the map is designed to be as a whole. So before I start cutting it up, and not to mention all the possibilities there of making it interactive or black and white, colorable, I just need to get the real thing out there in the first limited editions and posted prints as well. So there'll be something for every budget and every size. I hope, but yeah, there's so much there. I could get carried away forever. I think so. One bit at a time. Cool.
I'd just like to, I'd like to make a comment myself at the end. I noticed Baffin Island on there, and Jeff, our first speaker's eldest son, went and climbed the tallest cliff in the world in Baffin Island.
Mount Thor.
I don't know. Jeff,
That's all I know.
But he got off the plane and the Inuit guy said, "You talk just like the crocodile man." So there's connections all around the world. So a young man from New Zealand who went to live in the US for a while draws an incredible map, and it's been an incredible journey, and I'd like you to all thank him.